Hi, my name is Dr. Luke Arredondo. I'm the Executive Director of the St. Brendan Center for Evangelization and Spirituality here in the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee, and I have the great privilege today of introducing to you Father Robert Spitzer, who's going to be giving us a presentation on near-death experiences. Father Spitzer joined the Society of Jesus in August of 1974. He's just celebrated 50 years as a Jesuit. He was ordained to the priesthood in 1983 and has had a very successful career in various aspects of the Catholic Church, in theology and in leadership. He was the president of Gonzaga University from 1998 to 2009, and he led a major increase in student population and fundraising and campus building projects during that time. Today, he is the president of the Magus Center, whose mission is to turn the rising tide of unbelief in our culture through contemporary, rational, and science-based evidence. Father is the author of a number of books, including the recently published Science at the Doorstep to God, Science and Reason in the Support of God, the Soul, and Life After Death. We're delighted to have him here, and I now will turn the table over to him for his presentation.
Thanks so much, Dr. Luke. I will be talking today about what's called the scientific evidence for life after death and a transphysical soul. This will be coming from peer-reviewed medical journals of near-death experiences, terminal lucidity, and intelligence in hydrocephalic patients. I'm going to just spend the lion's share of time on near-death experiences. Before I begin, though, I do want to make a caution. There are a lot of anecdotes, a lot of stories out there about near-death experiences. Some of them are very accurate indeed, and some of them are not. Some of them are obviously skewed toward various agendas, and so again, be very, very careful about singular stories in isolation. What we want to do, and what I'm going to concentrate on in this talk, is evidence from good longitudinal studies of near-death experiences that have been done by hospitals over at least an 11-year period, at least several hundred to several thousand patients per study, and are published in peer-reviewed medical journals that really do look at the methodology and the safeguards in the responses. So that's my objective right now, and so I'm just going to talk about a few of those really excellent studies that are out there just as a starting point. The first study is definitely that done by the New York Academy of Sciences in 2022. It's published in the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences, obviously a peer-reviewed journal. In that journal, essentially, the New York Academy, this would be Dr. Parnia and his colleagues, 27 colleagues, who are scientists of various disciplines. Those individuals agreed in a consensus statement about near-death experience that concludes to the very credible possibility of your consciousness surviving bodily death. And they outline a series of features that are likely to be part of that, including being around in this world for a while, either in close proximity to the body or even remote from the body, say outside the hospital or outside the waiting room or something of that nature. And also a part two where there is a journey to an otherworldly domain where deceased relatives and friends are met, etc. But the New York Academy of Sciences really has taken a look at multiple different peer-reviewed medical studies of near-death experiences and has ascertained the very credible possibility of consciousness surviving bodily death. The second area is a study that was done at the University of Southampton under the aegis of Dr. Samuel Parnia. This was published, it's called the AWARE study. It was published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Resuscitation. 2,060 patients in 2014 throughout England and some parts of Europe. Excellent study longitudinally and methodologically. A very good study, but the main thing, again, is it argues to the strong likelihood that consciousness can and does survive bodily death, and in 60 cases in the AWARE study, that was indisputably so, from the data, et cetera. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. The third study that's excellent as well, also examines this with excellent method, is Dr. Pim van Lommel and his colleagues there in the Netherlands. It was a 2001 to 2003 study. Published in the number one medical journal there in Great Britain, The Lancet, and 2001 to 2003. There are a variety of other special studies, too, that are really important. One of them is Dr. Kenneth Ring's study of blind people, who've had experiences of actually seeing for the first time when they were clinically dead, flat EEG, fixed and dilated pupils, no gag reflex, some just mere sputterings of neurons in the lower brain, and they're seeing absolutely acutely, and of course they don't have a single visual image in their physical brain. It's a very important and persuasive study. 81% of those blind people, most of whom were blind from birth, see for the first time when they're clinically dead. No electrical activity in the cerebral or frontal cortices. There are other studies that are, Dr. Janice Holden has done a study of veridical data, 39 different studies. She's brought them together under the highest standards of accuracy, like 100% accurate description of the events going on during the time of brain death, clinical death, and she's done that to the point where she thinks that 81% of these people reporting the data are reporting it 100% accurately according to the strictest standards, which means there has to be consciousness, and it has to be, not just consciousness in some minimal sense. There has to be understanding, there has to be recollection, there has to be self-consciousness, because you're seeing yourself in relationship to what's going on. There has to be memory, has to be acute recall, because recall is part of the thing, as well, of course, as visual capacity and auditory capacity. So when you look at all of these studies that are out there, and then you combine it with the immense archives that have been completed by the University of Virginia's Medical School, the Department of Perceptual Studies there, especially Dr. Emily Kelly and Dr. Bruce Grayson, you can see pretty much that this is truly an amazing group of literature, a good peer-reviewed studies, and that's why the New York Academy of Sciences has really pronounced on what would have been considered even 10 years ago to be a radical pronouncement that consciousness will be surviving bodily death. Okay, let's take a look at some of the data here, some of the evidence that has been accumulated. First of all, we have veridical data, and there are thousands of cases of veridical. Just means it has been verified by an independent researcher after the fact. So, during a person's quasi-brain death state, right? So when you have a flat EEG, you have no electrical activity in the cerebral or vertical cortices. If that's, the cerebral or frontal cortices, if that's really happening, then no electricity, it's like turning off the light switch. Nothing's going to happen. There's not going to be any activity in those lobes, along with the visual and auditory cortices as well. So what you're dealing with is basically a person who can't see, hear, think. You maybe hear, but certainly not see or think, remember and recall, and be self-conscious with emotion. So what happens then at this moment, where there's flat EEG, et cetera, a soul body kind of leaves the physical body. But the soul body can do all those things I just mentioned. Think and recall and remember, has vision, actually has sometimes 360-degree all-around vision, hearing, emotion, self-consciousness, and is not subject to physical laws such as walls. You can pass right through a wall. Physical processes and structures, you can go right straight up to the roof if you want and pass through all the ceilings in between. You're not subject to gravity, etc. In this kind of spiritual or soul body is what it's referred to as popularly. The main thing here is that when this occurs, people claim, when they're at that state of flat EEG, fixed and dilated pupils, etc., when that state occurs, they claim that they can actually see things that are near their body, for example, what's going on in the operating room, or they can see things that are in the waiting room next door, separated by a clear barrier, or even outside the hospital, and even more remote than outside the hospital. So, and they report these incidents. An independent researcher actually, determines whether that happened or not, according to separate standards that are, obviously objective, and they then can verify that consciousness was taking place at that place. I'll just give a few examples, and that should be good enough. In the operating room, one of Pim von Lommel's patients actually just said, well, Mr. So-and-so, we lost your dentures. And von Lommel's patient said, no, you didn't lose my denture. The nurse with the red hair took the dentures out of my mouth right before they put the paddles on me. And then, she opened up a drawer underneath a machine that looked like XYZ, threw the dentures in there. If you find the nurse with the red hair and you find the machine that looks like XYZ, then, open the drawer, you'll see and sure enough, there they are. So you get the point. Again, one girl, Maria, again, she leaves her body. This is remote from the operating room, right? So she leaves her soul body, leaves her physical body. She goes zooming outside the hospital, and she's hovering up on the third floor there, looking back at the hospital from the vantage point of outside looking in. So to make a long story short, she says, I'm looking down there and I see this tennis shoe there with a worn left toe and a shoelace stuck underneath the heel. And I just reported it to one of your researchers. And one of Dr. Morse's researchers actually crawled out on the ledge, and there was the tennis shoe with the worn left toe and the shoelace underneath the heel. Probably had been there for 22 years from one of the construction workers. Nobody had ever seen it before, but Maria did, and enough said. So you get the point. That's pretty clear that consciousness had to be taking place in order for her to identify this. And we have literally thousands of cases now of verified data of people who are actually 100% accurate in their reports of what's going on when they're nearly brain dead. They're at what's called a state of clinical death. Okay, let's just take a look at a second major factor here. As I said, 81% of blind people, most of whom were blind from birth, see for the first time when they are clinically dead. Flat EEG, fixed and dilated pupils, etc. Okay, so the main thing is this blind person, remember, he has or she has no visual images in their physical brain. So it would be impossible to hallucinate a visual image because there aren't any visual images. It's a very different kind of imagination in a blind person, certainly not colorful and so forth. So the idea then is that these blind people, I'll give you the example of Bradley Burroughs, a 16-year-old boy blind from birth. He goes, during his heart attack, he basically goes zooming through the hospital walls, and he goes right up to the top of the hospital, and as he zooms up there, he's looking at a scene of snow out on the ground there, and he knew it was snowing, outside the hospital, but when he had his heart attack, of course, he was able to see for the first time what snow looked like. But then, as he's out there by the wall of the hospital, he sees a tram passing by with a big, huge sign on the back of it with an arrow pointing to the right. The train is going down slowly down this track and finally turns into a grove of trees off to the right. Now, Trams, just like trains, they have schedules down to the second. And of course, Bradley's heart attack and then clinical death with the flat EEG can be timed down to the second. And right down to the coincidence of those seconds, literally Bradley's, what Bradley described in his image of the tram going down the tracks and going into the trees, exactly what happened right at that time next to the hospital as he was describing. So again, you see hundreds of these cases of blind people seeing for the first time, reporting 100% accurately. They don't even have a chance of having a visual image in their brains because they've never seen anything before. All I can tell you is the physicalist explanations simply do not work. Let's just take a look at some other quick evidence. Again, if you attach a modified polygraph to people after they've had a near-death experience, you can actually measure the absence of death anxiety. So in other words, all of us have a subconscious death anxiety. All of us, if I give you some Rorschachs or I show you some pictures of sharks with big teeth or some daggers with blood flowing off of it or a skull and crossbones or something else, you might say, well, I'm a Christian and I don't have any problem with that. Consciously, you wouldn't have a problem with that. You probably say, okay, death is death, but there's an afterlife, there's a resurrection with Christ, I'm doing okay. So it wouldn't bug you consciously. But subconsciously, where you can't control your emotions, or you have instinctual drives, when you see all of this data that is very, very death-provoking, or fear-provoking, blood-provoking, danger-provoking, all of these things you react to with a modified polygraph, right? You're going to have a little bit of emotional discharge there, which is easily monitored. Well, get this: you take a kid who has a near-death experience, and a lot of children have near-death experiences, but the main thing is the child who has a near-death experience says, well, I left my body, I went to another world, etc. That child comes back, and you put that modified polygraph on. You show them any danger image, any bloody image, any shark image, any skull and cross, nothing. No death anxiety. 40 years out. You can test them again when they're 40 years old. They've lost their subconscious death anxiety over which they have no control. So I'm just saying, this is bizarre. But it happens during near-death experiences and no other time. And it lasts throughout the rest of your life, 40, 50 years down the pike. Okay, let's also take a look at just two other features that are good evidence. During a near-death experiences, there are oftentimes two phases, right? So the first phase, you're kind of here on this earth, right? You're looking around what's going on in the operating room, or like Bradley Burroughs, you're outside the hospital, or like Maria, you're outside the hospital looking at the hospital from the outside looking in, or you might be in the waiting room. By the way, never say anything bad about anybody in the waiting room who's died, because they can go right through those waiting room doors and hear everything you're saying. And I might point out this has happened in dozens and dozens of cases where people said, I went right through the walls into the waiting room, and guess what I heard you saying? So be nice. Just an aside here. The main thing to look at, though, is there's a second phase to a near-death experience. So you're, maybe around in the world, but also the second phase goes into an otherworldly domain. And in adults, this about 80% of the time, an adult will have a heavenly experience. 20% of the time, an adult will have a very dark experience, including everything on the scale from loneliness, and a state of depression, despair, all the way up to something horrifying, reserved for those who are generally cruel. But the point, though, is about 20% of the experiences are dark, and about 80%. Now, that's not an absolute percentage, Because remember, with adults, we only know 20% of adults remember that they had a near-death experience. So there's 80% of adults that didn't know they had a near-death experience. So you don't know the disposition of what would have happened to the 80% that say they don't remember, and they probably don't remember. It could be repressed or any one of a number of other things. But the main point is, if they don't remember, the statistic 80-20 doesn't mean anything. It just means that the 20% who did remember had a heavenly one. 20% did not. They had a dark one. With children, it's almost 100% have a very good experience. And children, about 65% of children have a near-death experience, and of that, 100% it's heavenly almost. Now, let's get back to the point at hand. So oftentimes, if you have a pleasant experience, a heavenly experience in this other domain, you are often met by deceased family members, mostly family members, 5% of the time by friends, but most of the time deceased family members. And of those who go to the heavenly domain, I think it's 65% of those going to the heavenly domain do have an experience of family members. I think it's 60% have maybe it's 50% have the experience of a loving white light that they identify as either God or Christ. 18% have a visible experience of Christ who looks like a human being. That's 18% of adults. A lot more children have experiences of a very visible, human-figured Christ. A lot of people identify Christ, though, in this loving white light. Let's get down to the relatives. That's the thing that makes for good evidence here. The main thing with the relatives is, and this is really doable with children. So the child might come and say, well, Granddaddy met me, when I was in heaven. And of course, the parents or the researchers will say, well, Granddaddy, he died 20 years before you were born. How do you know it was Granddaddy? Oh, because he told me. Okay, well, what did Granddaddy look like? And they put out a photo array of 20 different photos. And now if they put the photograph of Granddaddy when he was 80, when he died, maybe the child will go, I don't know that person. But when people are in their soul bodies, when they're in that spiritual state, they revert back to what they looked like when they were 25 to 30 years old. So almost 100% of the time, if you put like Granddaddy into the photo array in his uniform during World War II or something, and you put it in, you mix it in with 20 other people, boom, the kid will say, even with the uniform on, that's Granddaddy. They recognize him right from the 25 to 30-year-old picture, almost 100% of the time, dead on. Now, there's a huge archive of all these things, as I said, at the University of Virginia Medical School, Department of Perceptual Studies. So, clearly they're seeing stuff. And, Granddaddy or Uncle Joe or whoever who died way before this child, right, tells them certain things about their lives, certain things about themselves, certain things about their parents, which, of course, the parents have not disclosed to the child. And the child comes back and, kind of reports them. Well, all these things are archived, as I said, University of Virginia Medical School. The main thing, though, that's important, again, is that you've got a lot of testimony here that people did go over to the other side. They did see somebody who identified themselves as Granddaddy. They can pick that person right out of a photo array. It's absolutely amazing what they can do. And then when they pick them out, it so turns out that this is what they looked like when they were 25 to 30 years old. Okay, so there's so much evidence, as I started with, that the New York Academy of Sciences has declared, the very credible possibility your consciousness is going to survive your bodily death. And I would not just call it consciousness. It's a soul body. You're not just a disembodied consciousness that survives your physical body's death. there is something akin to a soul body with consciousness, self-consciousness, memory, recall, and emotion and so forth. That's there. It's not attached to the physical body at all, but it's a soul body, and it looks like people look like when they were 25 to 30 years old, and the kids can nail it almost every time with the picture of that person. All right, so that's the evidence. I think it's exceedingly strong. I think there is an otherworldly domain that we have touched upon. As I said, we don't know the exact numbers for adults because, honestly, 80% of adults, we don't know what happened. They just can't recall it. 20% that do, though, it's an 80-20 deal again. 80% heavenly, 20% dark. Okay, let's just go quickly to, push through. I've talked about the different kinds of evidence already with you. I think, as I said, it's very strong. Let's take a look at just, and you can see the various stages, right? There's a stage here in this world, stage in another world. The loving white light, almost always identified as God or Christ. Okay, let's take a look at whether physicalist explanations will work or not. Are they really great? A physicalist basically tries to say this is all explicable with some physical explanatory apparatus. So it's your brain that's hallucinating. It's your brain that's having dreamlets. It's your brain, when I stimulate the temporal lobes of the brain, it actually produces some lights or some images and so forth and so on. So you can, the parietal lobe is especially good for, stimulation of, images and so forth. So that must be it. It's a physical, explanation. There's really about 5 things that militate against all of these things. The first thing is you'll never explain how 81% of blind people, most of whom were blind from birth, could possibly hallucinate or get a stimulated visual image out of their physical brain. They don't have any. So the first thing is you got to give up. You'll never explain blind people with a physical explanation. Hallucinations out of the question. They don't have the visual imagination for hallucination. They don't have, right? You can, dreamlets, they're not going to have any dreamlets that look like our visual images because they don't have any in their brains to stimulate when you stimulate the parietal lobe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the key thought is blind people, all those hundreds of cases of people reporting 100% accurate data can't be explained. About, I'd say, 80% of the cases, let's just take Bradley Burroughs. Forget about the fact that he's blind. Lots of non-blind people see things outside the hospital. Take Maria. You're just not going to be able to explain what Maria saw. How are you going to hallucinate 100% accurately what is taking place outside the hospital that nobody is aware of for 20 years and finally is seen by her for the first time and reported because it's sort of invisible shoe on a 3rd floor ledge outside of a hospital? How are you going to do this? That kind of data, no matter how much you believe in coincidence, I mean, the odds of Linda being able to do this is like trying to describe, tap with random tapping of the keys, a Shakespeare soliloquy by random tapping of the keys in a single try. That's not going to happen. So, I mean, the idea of describing perfectly unknown data 100% accurately, again, outside. So it's not anywhere near the body. It's outside the hospital. Very, very difficult to explain. Number 3. Third thing is near-death experiences are almost 100% accurate. Hallucinations are notoriously inaccurate on every level. Dreamlets are inaccurate, right? Stimulation, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, all these, anoxia, okay, you got some lights. What is it? There's no accuracy to it, right? I mean, there's, what's in a light? A light. So that doesn't give you an accurate image to describe, et cetera, et cetera. So again, hallucinations are notoriously inaccurate, very weird, as a matter of fact, and so forth. Whereas near-death experiences are 100% accurate. in near-death experiences, there's no electrical activity in the brain. Remember, flat EEG, fixed and dilated pupils, no gag reflex, just a few sputterings of neurons in the lower brain. So you have no electrical activity in the higher functions of the brain. Well, in order to hallucinate anything, every physicalist explanation must have electrical activity in the brain because the physical brain is producing the so-called hallucination, or that's where the stimulation of the parietal. If you don't have any electrical activity in your brain, you can stimulate your parietal lobe all day long. You aren't going to get a vision because there's no electrical activity to be, the conductor, the agency source of that imaginative memory. Okay, and you just can keep going. Same thing with dreamlets. Same thing with physicalist explanations and all. Last thing, the sixth thing, fifth thing, where you have a real difference between NDEs and physicalist explanation. The NDEs, let's face facts. NDEs are peaceful when people have their heavenly experience. About 80% of the time and 100% of the time in children, this is a very peaceful explanation. Hallucinations, dreamlets, and stimulation of the parietal lobe, absolutely the opposite. Produces very weird and almost sometimes antagonistic moods, very unpeaceful, moods, and so forth. So this is again, you can see that the physicalist explanations are wanting. And so what can we conclude at the end about these physicalist explanations? What can we conclude about NDEs? I think we can conclude safely to what the New York Academy of Sciences has said. There is a very credible possibility that not just your consciousness, but your soul body will survive the death of your physical body, that there will be a moment where you are aware of everything going on around your worldly surroundings, even if it may be in the operating room, could be outside the operating room in the waiting room, could be outside the hospital, could be remote from the hospital. But surely something is happening where you are cognizant of these things. And then there's a second part to the whole thing, which of course is moving to a heavenly domain or to a dark domain. In the heavenly domain, the deceased relatives and friends, as well as the very loving, exceedingly bright, very loving white light, identified as God or Christ. And in the dark domain, there is the scariness of loneliness and despair, and also the horror scenes as well that characterize some of those images. Christ is figured prominently in just so many, either as the white light or as a separate identifiable human figure. 18% for the latter. Okay, I'll just stay right there for a second and say, yeah, I'm convinced you have a transphysical soul, and I'm convinced there's life after death, and I am convinced that Christ and that a loving God is part of that, life after death, or in some cases, there is a dark, lonely, and sometimes terrifying experience after death. Okay, let's any other evidence for a transphysical soul besides what we've seen in the peer-reviewed medical studies of near-death experiences? There are two in particular that I just want to talk about today. The first one is called terminal lucidity, a phenomenon that is pretty common now among people who work in the oncology area, and certainly the researchers who deal with this at Harvard University and other places. Basically, the phenomenon may be described as follows. About 1 to 2 hours before someone dies. Here we're talking about a person who has been fundamentally challenged intellectually in terms of their physical brain. They have been challenged right down to almost an IQ less than 25, almost zero capacity from their physical brain, not even able to make animal sounds, or not even able to, swallow without devices to help them swallow. So they've been basically disabled intellectually so seriously that there is, almost, the debilitation from serious dementia, serious Alzheimer's, brain lesions, genetic difficulties, and certainly brain trauma and a variety of other things, so debilitated that they can't possibly think with their physical brain. And they have not done so for 5 years. Now suddenly, after 5 years of never uttering a word, not even an animal sound, this person gets up and goes, "Hey, Bob, I'm about to die." This is 1 to 2 hours before death. "I'm about to die. I'm going to die in a couple of hours. I really need some help with my funeral. I've left all the plans. Would you say the Mass for me? And by the way, could you throw these elements into the homily there? Could you also call up these 3 people? I really want to reconcile with them before I die in a couple of hours. By the way, my will, it's just incomplete." And, as Rudolph Tanzi would say, these doctors are looking at this person who's basically a vegetable. I shouldn't say it in that way, but they are. And they're suddenly, like you and me, they're saying all these things that would require reflective understanding, memory, and consciousness. So all I can tell you is they're going, "Who are you? What's happened?" And as Rudolph Tanzi says, well, it's totally inexplicable. It's amazing, but it happens all the time. And he's one of the main researchers over at Harvard University. And there's a lot of, like I said, Bruce Grayson over at University of Virginia Medical School, and a variety of other researchers, Michael Nahm over in Germany, et cetera, have been writing about this in some detail. The research now is very, very good. But how can you explain this? You can only explain it as if this soul body, which I've been trying to describe, right? It's like a spiritual body that detaches or leaves the physical body. Somehow, 1 to 2 hours before death, what seems to happen is that the soul body begins to gradually detach from the physical body. And as it gradually detaches, it still has some connection with the central nervous system, obviously the vocal cords, obviously other parts of the lower brain, and it kind of remains there in that state. But it's not the physical brain that's doing the thinking. It's your soul consciousness that's doing the thinking, remembering, reflective understanding, etc. During that time. But it's still connected. The soul body is still connected with the physical body. That seems to be the only explanation for how they're able to do this. And so that's essentially my quick and easy sort of response. But what is doing the thinking? It's the same thing that leaves the body in the near-death experience. That soul body with its consciousness, self-consciousness, emotion, and memory intact. It is the one that is doing the thinking. All right, let's just go to one last thing. Intelligence in hydrocephalic patients is very important. There are several people who have been involved. The Lorber and Lewin studies are particularly significant because Lorber did 600 scans of hydrocephalic patients and made some remarkable discoveries. I better describe hydrocephalus for just a moment. Hydrocephalus is when spinal fluid begins to go up through the base of the cranium there and starts leaking into the cranium, the cranial cavity there, and it destroys the brain tissue and replaces, the spinal fluid replaces that brain tissue. And it just, if you don't stop it with a shunt or something of that nature, it's just going to keep on going until it gets to over 95% of the brain is destroyed and replaced by spinal fluid. And so we would expect that someone who has less than 5% of their physical brain is not going to be doing much thinking. I mean, obviously, their whole cerebral cortex and frontal cortex are gone. They're not going to be doing a lot of thinking. So the main thing is, could intelligence be possible? So this guy Lorber, of course, in Germany, he writes this study up, and he has 600 scans, and he finds that 30 of those people who've been scanned, right, verified they have less than 5% of their brain, 95% of their cranium is filled with spinal fluid. They have a global IQ over 100. How is this possible? In fact, Lorber was so stunned, he basically called his article, "Is your physical brain really necessary?" And of course, the answer is not really. And so this is the idea. Now, one of them that Lorber loved to describe was a mathematics student that he knew. And this kid had a 127 global IQ, but he had a verbal IQ of something like 145 or 147 or something like that. Anyway, it was a very high verbal IQ. And he had less than 1 millimeter of brain. I mean, between the ventricles and in the cortical tissue, 1 millimeter of brain tissue, and he's got a genius level IQ. He has almost no brain, and he's got a genius level IQ. Lorber just said, "That's it. All I can tell you is something else is doing the thinking." And that's right. The same soul body that we saw in terminal lucidity, the same soul body that leaves the physical body during a near-death experience, for which we have excellent vertical data and excellent data from blind people, etc. It's the same thing. My final comment to you is, you are not simply a physical body. No one, after the New York Academy of Sciences pronouncement, no one should be thinking that they are reducible to molecules and atoms. Yes, you've got a lot of molecules and atoms. And yes, there are overlapping functions between what's going on in the soul consciousness and what's going on in the physical brain. Yes, there are overlapping memory functions and so forth. However, at the same time, must tell you that the soul consciousness and the soul body are not dependent on the physical consciousness of the physical brain and, of course, the physical body. So at the end of the day, what I can clearly tell you, and what I believe to be reasonable and responsible based on scientific evidence, is that you do have a consciousness and a soul body that will survive bodily death, that the afterlife looks very much like Jesus Christ described it. If you have a heavenly experience, it is loving. If you have a dark experience, it is dark. The key thing is it's very much like what Jesus described it to be. And on top of all of those things, of course, we don't know whether it's eternal, but we can know that from the revelation of Jesus. And so I think it's reasonable and responsible to believe that you will have a life after death. That it will either be what Jesus described as a loving experience with a loving Father, or it will be a dark experience with a dark Father. The point, of course, is I think there's good scientific validation for it. I think you are a transmaterial being, that you have a transphysical soul, and for all intents and purposes, if you continue to investigate this more fully and other kinds of things like the Shroud of Turin, etc., well, I can assure you, you will see similar correlations between not just science and God, but science and Christianity, the Christian life, the resurrection of Jesus, and even miraculous hosts that reveal living, a tissue growing out of those hosts in the Holy a consecrated host in the Holy Eucharist. So it's out there. I have 2 books which I recommend to you. Science at the Doorstep to God, published by Ignatius Press, and Christ, that deals with the God, life after death, the near-death experience studies, cosmological evidence for God, etc. And then there's another one called Christ, Science, and Reason. That's got all the scientific evidence for Jesus, for the Shroud of Turin, Eucharistic miracles, Marian miracles, particularly looking at the miracle of the sun at Fatima, some of the absolute remarkable healings at Lourdes, and of course the tilma, the remarkable tilma of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Well, thanks so very much for your kind attention to this podcast, and just want to say that keep looking at the science and keep looking at the faith, and you will find out why the vast majority of scientists are believers in God today. 51% of scientists believe in God, declare themselves believers in God or a higher transcendent power. Only 21% are agnostic, 20% are atheist, 8% don't want to respond. And then you have, among young scientists, 66%, a supermajority, claim to be believers in God. Only 15% agnostic, 15% atheist. 76% of medical doctors are believers in God. Only 12.5% are agnostic, 11.2% are atheists. So there you go. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Have fun, because science and faith are very complementary and mutually corroborative indeed.
Wow. Thank you very much, Father. This is a really great introduction. I know it's only an introduction. You've got all these books that you've written, and I'm sure there's a fuller piece to all these stories. But it was really great. The restraint that I know you must be exercising to skim the surface and sort of just bring out the most important facts. That was really great. So I've got a couple of follow-up questions based on just what you've been discussing, and then a couple of sort of more methodological things that I think might be helpful to sort of deepen in a couple areas. One, this is just sort of a curiosity. You know, you've got a unique background where you have a very coherent grasp of science, obviously a grasp of theology, and you can, because you've got knowledge in both of those areas, you can kind of see where they touch. As you say, they're mutually corroborative. I know that there's a big movement among theologians, right, to pick up the scientific knowledge. You know, yourself, you're an example of this. Chris Baglow and others. There's the Academy for sort of I forget the name of it, but it's an association of Catholic theologians who are, you know, merging into scientific knowledge as well. Do you see? Is there, maybe this already exists, but is there something like that for scientists, right, who want to sort of get a theological foothold? Or does it hold them back, right? There's scientists that are doing this explanation, and they say, okay, the consciousness survives. And you made this distinction between consciousness and a soul body. And obviously that's a very different, you know, concept.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess from the scientific perspective, where do you see the opportunity to help scientists acquire theological knowledge?
Yeah, I think, you know, when I go to these big conferences like the Wonder Conference or so forth, it's got to be about 90% doctors, scientists, engineers, you know, or academics, or you know, high school teachers in the sciences, et cetera, that go there. And they want to listen to other scientists talk about the evidence for faith from science. So I do think that all of these things here, my book, New Pursuit of the Existence of God, it's been out since 2010, are you know, truly, you know, there's a lot there. When I debated Stephen Hawking and Leonard Mladenov and Deepak Chopra way back in 2010 with on the Larry King show, I get tons of calls by scientists. You know, yay, you know, finally somebody's you know, saying something on a public forum. But the main thing though is even Hawking has joined the gang in 2018 because you know, he basically came out with his article "Smooth Exit from Eternal Inflation." And, you know, that helped a lot of other scientists to find, well, if Hawking and Hertog can do it, you know, I mean, if they're beginning to say, well, any multiverse that could have produced or generated our universe could not be a fractal multiverse and therefore would have to have a beginning. To make a declaration like that. And Hawking, of course, knew what the implications of calling, you know, talking about a beginning of physical reality, whether it's a multiverse or just our universe. He knows it implies, you know, a creator outside of physical reality and space-time asymmetry. So he knows it.
Yeah.
And for him to do it, you know, a lot of people start saying, well, you know, maybe I can come out of the closet too. I've always more or less wanted to believe, but you know, I'm going to do this cautiously. And all scientists, you know, they have to do it cautiously. They got to make sure they've explained all the naturalistic explanations. But you know, when you're dealing with miraculous phenomena, as in the case of Lourdes or Fatima, I mean, you run out of naturalistic explanations that are even remotely feasible, and finally you're just stuck with looking at something supernatural indeed. So, I mean, you know, I would have to say that. I find that just putting this out helps scientists as well. The Society of Catholic Sciences, my good friend Steve Barr there, Dr. Steve Barr, and you know, one of the people on my you know, board, Modus board, is Dr. Dan Keebler, who's the
Franciscan.
So the main thing is those two guys, for example, they are definitely trying to bring you know, scientific evidence you know, to the to not only to the faith door, but for the sake of the scientists, but for the sake of students and for the sake of people who have been bullied for the last 50 years by Dawkins, Spaghetti Monster God website, and God Delusion website, and so forth and so on. I mean, bullied and bullied. So many of our young people are still bullied.
Yeah.
But right now, when I started a curriculum with Sophia Institute for Teachers called the Catholic Faith and Science, and that one senior year course, it's the anti-bully pill. Because I'm not kidding. The belief level of students, according to what's called the ARC survey, right? The assessment of religious knowledge and belief. The senior year, the belief level, even though the knowledge level is a B to B plus, the belief level is a D plus.
Wow.
That's Delta plus. And that's a 67. It's bad.
Sure.
That means that kid's not going to have very much belief into college. You take our one semester course, Catholic Faith and Science, just bring out all the scientific evidence for God, Jesus, the soul, etc., life after death. By the time you're done, it turns to an 83, a B. That's a 16-point differential. If you give the kids the evidence, they won't be bullied anymore. And if they're not bullied anymore and they've got a great intellectual rejoinder, it makes all, for themselves, it makes all the difference. But also for the opposition who's bullying them, it makes all the difference. Especially, they go into the university classroom, and some blowhard literary professor comes out there and says, science has disproved God. Oh, wait a minute, what about the Board of Lincoln and Guth proof? The what? Of course, he hasn't heard of the Board of Lincoln Guth proof. He doesn't even know what entropy is. He has no idea what's gone on with Hawking and fractal multiverse or anything else. It's just it's an offhand blowhard statement from somebody in literature. And so, he makes his statement, but he doesn't have facts. I mean, a guy in literature could have lots of facts. But in this case, most of the time, they don't. And they just bully kids, right and left. So, like I said, we have to make the anti-bully pill, but we have a program now called Speak the Faith, where we start it actually in the 7th and 8th grade.
Awesome. Yeah. One of the things that, overarching principles of the, the discussion you just led, about the physicalism and the limits of physicalism, I wonder, how much we realize that physicalism dominates it's the assumption. It's the assumption that's everywhere. And, for Catholics, so one thing that you said that really kind of brought this to me, do we really is your physical brain really necessary, right? Maybe not, I can see that kind of comment being utterly unintelligible to many people, right? Because they think, well, what else could you be if you're not your physical brain? But there's a sense in this which is it's a shocking statement. But with the Catholic anthropology, that shouldn't be shocking at all, because angels don't have physical brains and they have intellect and will, But so it's funny how there's some of these fundamental Catholic principles that can get so easily forgotten, like you say, pushed and bullied almost in a corner. And then you put it that way, and if you've got a background in Catholic anthropology, you go, well, of course there's a sense in which we don't really need a physical brain. But so I wonder if maybe a couple of comments there on just how important that foundation is, and how it's not merely an apologetic tool, but it's baked into the cake of how we as Catholics think about the human person.
Again, I'd have to say that the idea that we believe in angels or even believe in spirits, and it helps tremendously. So that a lot of our Catholic kids should not be physicalists, but they have taught to be.
They've been taught that way in some ways, though. Right.
And so they start taking on this kind of foreign methodology. Our objective is just to bring them back to where they once were. You thought you went crazy when you took your bio class and they told you were reducible to molecules and atoms. Well, look at all the evidence. You're really not reducible to atoms and molecules. You basically have this transphysical soul consciousness and soul body. That's what you have, and that the Catholic Church was right all along. What do you know? And of course, the idea is you start looking at, I didn't get into this, but exorcism phenomena.
Oh, sure.
If you don't think there are real demons out there, you think that, demons are just this medieval thing that has been made up. And, the devil's just a little cartoon character dressed in red tights and having horns with a trident. If you that, making fun of it, beware, because of course there is a dark spirit there. And that movie, The Exorcist, was based actually on the real case of Robbie Mannheim. Yeah, and so when you put together the diary of the exorcist who did that exorcism, and you put it together with many of the other diaries of exorcisms, you can pretty much see that there's something going on that's very angelic, very dark, and very evil.
Yeah.
But on the other side, you can see angels as well, and very white and very, I have a friend who basically was, crossing the street one day, and somebody just said, "Look out!" and yanked him back. And a car came careening down the street, and he looked back, and there was no one there. I have a friend who literally went to Lourdes to get, a cure. And she had, terrible edema, in her legs. I mean, swollen twice the size, and she had to wear her husband's shoes.
Yeah.
Because, she all of her, her feet were 2 to 3 times the size they once were. So she goes to Lourdes. She gets the water poured on her, and she's coming out, and nothing happened to her. So she stops outside for a second, and she pulls out, her old pills, to keep the edema managed and so forth. And a person just says, "Hey, you going to believe or not believe?" And she thinks to herself for a minute. She throws out the pills and starts walking. And the edema starts disappearing, literally, so much so that she's flopping around in her husband's shoes.
Wow.
Because over the course of 2-3 minutes, the edema without discharge of any kind literally disappears.
Yeah.
And this lives in Orange County, just a very nice gal. Everybody saw her when she went. Everybody saw her when she came back. Oh, what happened?
I'm curious. You described a number of studies, sort of studies examining other studies and some leading thinkers, and you mentioned Harvard, Lorber in Germany, the University of Virginia, and New York Academy of Science. These studies, right? Obviously, I understand why you look at them and go, "Wow, look, this is great. Let's get into this. Let's show people." Do you know? I mean, I don't know if you've talked with any of these doctors or any of these scholars. What is the reaction from their academic community? Obviously, they're peer reviewed, so they pass this sort of muster. But do they get suspicion? Are they treated like you're not doing real science? Do you have any sense there?
Oh, I'm sure that there are at least 50% of their colleagues are saying you're not doing real science. The main thing, though, is they're not daunted. Because, in fact, they are doing real science.
Yeah.
I mean, you can accuse anybody of... I know how many physicists do I know who say, well, physics is the real science. Everything else is kind of schlock.
Yeah.
I mean, it's second rate compared to the equation.
Sure,
well, I mean... That's just not true, and everybody knows that's just not true. Empirical, mathematical methodology can reach right out, right into those domains. So to make a long story short, I would just say, well, I guess, somebody like Pim van Lommel, I don't think he cares. He's very precise in his studies. He's very careful in what he says and does. He's publishing in The Lancet, the #1 medical journal of Great Britain. I mean, he can't be totally a wacko. And of course, he's not a wacko at all. But the main thing is the same thing with Parnia. He's publishing in very good peer-reviewed journals. He's got 27 colleagues signing on in all different areas of science, signing off on the consensus statement in the New York Academy of Sciences.
Yeah.
So, I guess there's a ton... There's a book by Mario Beauregard. He wrote a book called Brain Wars. And so you might want to take a look at that because, it's a war out there.
Yeah.
There's the physicalists and there's the non-physicalists. And it used to be, before the days of, even Abraham, the Harvard and Duke brain physiologist. who had a near-death experience himself and wrote about it. But prior to that, people just said, "Oh, these near-death experiences, it's all anecdotal."
Right.
Well, today is not all anecdotal.
Yeah.
And today there's just hundreds of unexplained
Yeah, that's really
cases.
incredible.
The blind stuff. How do you look in the face of that and go, "That's not an interesting scientific datum"?
Yes.
That's a really interesting scientific.
Yeah,
datum.
and I mean, as you brought out, in your presentation, if you've got a physicalist explanation and that's your metaphysics, right? Is it as physicalist only? There's no brain activity, there's no electrical activity. Where's the sight supposed to come from? I mean, I think that's a pretty solid argument.
Yeah.
So I have a question from Tom Neal, Dr. Tom Neal, who's here in the diocese. Wanted to be here, but he's on a trip to Tallahassee. So he wanted me to ask you this: do you think it's a helpful category to call near-death experiences a form of private revelation? And if you think that's helpful, or I guess even if you don't, how would we discern the relationship between the data that we've got from these near-death experiences and the divine revelation in the scriptures? Where do you see an opportunity there?
Well, I mean, calling it private revelation, I guess you could sort of say it is a private revelation. Private revelation, the reason for using the term is that nobody has to believe it.
Right.
It's just something that kind of super adds. From that point of view, I think that's right. But I don't think, what we want to do is study it.
Yeah.
Because even though nobody has to believe it, you can get to the bottom of the truth of it.
Sure.
Because there is verifiable data there.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to going to the other side, having the heavenly experience or the dark experience, that's definitely a private revelation.
Sure.
In part 2 of the thing. However, in part 1, where they're still in this world,
right,
and they are reporting verifiable data, or you can actually do a modified polygraph to see their death anxiety, or you can check, on the status of this guy's visual acumen or something. You can study it. So I do think we don't want to call that just private revelation.
Okay.
I think we want to call that some objective data that has been studied and has been validated by independent researchers after the fact, when we know that there is flat EEG, fixed and dilated pupils,
yes,
et cetera. So all those things, there's a studyable part, which I would call the objective part of near-death experience. Then the heavenly part, admittedly, is much more subjective, private revelation. But the experience of relatives and friends, when kids are picking out photo arrays, admittedly, it's circumstantial evidence.
Right.
But when you have 100% of kids, practically speaking, picking out what their grandfather or their great uncle looked like when they were 25 to 30 years old and never even knew them in real life, and they get it out of a photo array of 20, you sort of start saying, this is beyond just coincidence. This is really amazing that these kids can do it again and again. So again, there's some kind of objectivity there, but circumstantial for sure. You don't have direct empirical access to the objective data. So, you have to take the report from the kid, right?
Yeah.
So I do think we've got a lot of, possibilities. I think there's kind of 3 grades of this stuff. I think there's the studyable stuff, where we have, we're able to verify.
Right.
And then there's a second kind of grade where, the photo array, we would use it in a court of law as, something that is adequate circumstantial. He picked the correct photo out, and it wasn't just a photo of when his grandfather died. It was a photo of when his grandfather was 20 to 30 years old.
Yes.
And of course, he has no knowledge of this.
Yeah.
4-year-old or 5-year-old.
Right.
So then, so that's kind of what I would call respectable court grade circumstantial evidence. And then there's the private revelation.
Yeah.
The white light said to me, or, when I met Christ and he told me this.
Yeah.
That's all private revelation.
Yeah. No, I think that's helpful. And I also found it interesting, the way that you described only 20% of adults have this, near-death experience, and of that 20%, there's the 80% that have a sort of positive, loving, heavenly sort of experience, and a 20% in the other direction. Saint Faustina, of course, I think everybody knows as the Saint of Divine Mercy, right? That's her primary mission, and she's so frequent to proclaim God's mercy, but she also had private revelations of the depths of hell. Yeah. She has said in her diary that I would have died at the very sight of these tortures if the omnipotence of God had not supported me, and I am writing this at the command of God so that no soul may find an excuse by saying that there is no hell or that nobody has ever been there. And so I think it's interesting that she is the apostle of divine mercy, but also says, you better watch out. It's not all divine mercy. That there is another side of the coin.
Oh, and the horrifying experiences.
And
she
she describes some really gruesome stuff. I guess another question. Maybe this might be the final one. It's hard to choose from these, but this is a good general question, relevant not just to this discussion, but also to your more broad work at the Major Center and sort of at this intersection between science and faith. Sometimes I hear well-meaning Catholic apologists say, without much qualification, that science can prove our theology, science can prove our faith. And I kind of get a little bit nervous about that. I don't see you doing that at all, but it's something that's kind of common. And I wonder just sort of what your general thoughts are about that, because obviously, there's a difference between saying this is a helpful discussion and that we need science to know these things, right? We have there's a theological methodology, there's divine revelation, there's another way that we can learn theology, and we don't have to do it through science. But where do you see that discussion now? I mean, do you see that as a big problem or not? I don't know. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I don't know too many of the apologists. I hang around people who use much more nuanced terms, but I can tell you this: proof is a very narrow category.
Yes,
and science can't prove our theology.
Right.
Science can't disprove our theology.
That's
either.
True.
Because everything
absolutely.
that comes from science has to be grounded in observation. Observation has to come from within the event horizon of our universe. And God is definitely outside of our universe, so he can't disprove God with science. It's absolutely impossible by the methodological parameters of science itself. So that being the case, you don't have to worry. But the idea of science proving faith, no, that's not right. Science can give a lot of evidence.
Yeah.
For example, evidence of Jesus' resurrection from the Shroud of Turin, evidence of true living cardiac tissue growing out of a Eucharistic host that is so integrated with that Eucharistic host through electron microscopy. You can see it's integrated on the level, the thin filaments of the myofibrils, which is only a few microns of separation, right? That's like cell lengths of separation within that integration. No, human technology could produce this weave at all. I mean, this is just like completely beyond human technology. And so I consider it beyond a fraud. But my point would be, though, you call it evidence, and it's evidence in support of something we can know already by our faith. For example, do I need science from the Shroud of Turin to prove the resurrection of Jesus? No, I don't. There's tons of evidence. First of all, the church has given us her word over the course of centuries that this is exactly what the apostolic witness was. I believe it. Don't need anything more. Number two, is there like hostile evidence for Jesus and his crucifixion that came from witnesses who are hostile and living around the time? Yeah, Flavius Josephus says that Jesus was a miracle worker, that he was a wise man, that he was crucified under the procurator Pontius Pilate. He gave rise to a sect that's around to this very day. The same thing with Cornelius. By the way, Flavius Josephus was a Jewish historian writing for the Romans. Not exactly friendly to the Christian church. I mean, secondly, of course, Cornelius Tacitus, even worse. He thinks, Christians are crazy. But I mean, at the same time, he says there is Christus, and And Christus definitely, was committed, a punishable penalty under the extreme penalty, which is crucifixion, under the procurator Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. So we've got plenty of historical indications.
Right.
So historical sources are great. There's a huge literature, what's called historical exegetical literature. It started with the third movement for the historical Jesus. So you got a lot of guys like Joachim Jeremias and his historical criteria. N.T. Wright, fantastic in the area of historical exegesis, and especially his book on the resurrection, called The Resurrection of the Son of God. And then you have John P. Meyer. They're no better historical apologetic for Jesus' miracles than Meyer's seminal A Marginal Jew, Volume 2, which is seminal work. And then Richard Bauckham.
Oh, Bauckham's fantastic.
His book, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses.
Yeah.
I have a brand new book from OSV just called Science, Reason, and Faith, Discovering the Bible. The first 40 pages of the New Testament section is on Richard Bauckham.
Yeah.
The guy is like a machine.
I love the way he discusses how, there's all these doubts about the oral tradition and, the punishments for not being word perfect in written societies where oral tradition was, prized and practiced. The reliability of that, it's just beautiful stuff. Bauckham is one of my favorites. I was lucky to study with Brant Petrie, and so he made me read Richard Bauckham, and boy, do I have I benefited from that. There's a beautiful seed that he planted for me.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Well, listen, it's been what an honor for me to be able to sit down with you, and I know for the people of Pensacola-Tallahassee, this is going to be a great great resource for us to be able to point them toward. Any closing remarks you'd like to make, or resources you want to recommend, where to find you, anything like that?
Sure. First of all, as I said, we've had such success with the ARC results for our Catholic Faith and Science course for the senior year. Just anybody who knows any school anywhere, I'm begging you to get 1 or 2 teachers in every single Catholic school to teach this course. It's just a 1-semester course in the senior year, either the first or second semester, but teach it. It transforms the kids from a D+ in belief to a B in belief, which is just categorically different. It's a huge difference. And, if there's a school that doesn't teach it is remiss to me, because it's just such a huge difference. The kids need the evidence. The evidence is there. All I did was put it out in a masterful work that Sophia has published and helped me to put the teacher's guides together and so forth. I've got a whole set of videos that accompanies it. You can just play the video for the first lesson, like 20 lessons. You just play the video for the first ones, me bloviating on, and then once that video is done, then you can actually go into the various topics in the book itself. But it is really convincing, and the scientific experts that attest to it are really, really good. So that's one thing I just want to say is any teachers out there who are willing to teach us in the senior year. We also have a middle school course called Speak the Faith. I'm begging you, please get that into your middle schools as well. And then I've got 3 really recent books that I would plug along with my Magis Center website. That's magiscenter.com. And in that, we've got so much free stuff. Don't have to spend a penny. Get all these modules. It can really help your young people. Like I said, everything's free. And then if you want the books, the Science at the Doorstep to God is the one on evidence of God, life after death, the soul. And then Christ, Science, and Reason. That's the stuff that looks at the crucifixion, resurrection of Jesus on the shroud, the Eucharistic miracles, the Marian miracles, the new evidence on the Tilma of Guadalupe, etc. All those things are there in Christ, Science, and Reason. I've got another book in OSV, Science, Reason, and Faith, Discovering the Bible. That's the one where I discuss Richard Bauckham. I discuss all the 10 major criteria of historicity in the New Testament from Joachim Jeremias through J.P. Meyer. John P. Meyer, and so you can see all that stuff. It's amazing what's out there. Nobody should be an unbeliever on the basis of intellectual reasons. And I'm telling you, 50% of our kids, according to the 2012, 2016, 2018 Pew surveys, like 50% will leave the faith. They're believing Catholics because they think there's no evidence for God, Jesus, and the soul from science, and they also believe that science and faith are contradictory, when it's exactly the opposite. Today, all the scientists are believers. Well, not all of them. Super majority of young scientists are believers. And this is the time when 50% of our young people are leaving because they think there's no scientific evidence.
Wow.
Grr.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Father, so much for your mission. I mean, all these many years, 50 years as a Jesuit. Congratulations again on that. And for your time here. Really appreciate it. And would you mind giving us a blessing to close it out?
Absolutely. Bow your heads and pray for God's blessing. And may Almighty God send His Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit of wisdom, of knowledge, of science, but of love and a deep understanding of the human psyche, deep understanding of the ways of holiness, deep understanding of the ways of purgation come into your heart and lead you not only into the fullness of life, but also to help you help others into the fullness of life. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Father.
God bless you.